Here we are at Cherry Mansion. This was famous because Grant stayed here. That mansion right there. Don't think it's open just yet because the gate's closed. Are in support of the Confederate cause. Two brothers who served in the Southern Army later remarked that Grant had conducted himself as gentlemen and all courteous. This is where General Grant was when the Battle of Shiloh started, which is actually in the area. This is where a federal thing. This spot already there, or more accurately, that spot down there, happens to be the Trail of Tears historic ferry crossing. This is where they crossed the Savannah River. So I actually did get back on the trail. Hey, who knew? Too bad it's not open. Oh, I think it's private property. I think it's private property, that's why. That's not open. On this one, I took my time and did a little research because I was stopping at Shiloh National Battlefield. The Battle of Shiloh, Civil War. It's in Tennessee, and it's a great place to go and visit if you're into history, and especially Civil War history, obviously. Take better video later about the entrance to this. Right here, I'm at the battlefield, National Battlefield of Shiloh. This is actually where I think Ulysses Grant first makes it like national news, because this was a major battle that he won. And at the time, during the Civil War, the Union was really short on victories that they could like brag about. So this was a major battle, and he won. Okay. Way out of what you're about to see. The Army of the Ohio, General Don Carlos Buell. Army of the Mississippi, Albert Sidney Johnson. Okay. And the Army of Tennessee under Grant. 43,000. Battle flag. Shiloh, 51, Tennessee. First day of the battle, the positions.
Hi, how are you?
Folks, how are you all today?
We are well, thank you.
Good, I have a map for you.
That would be
So the Union was...
a movie to see, right?
Yeah, there'll be a movie right back here to your right at 11 o'clock.
Got it. We will see it at 11 o'clock then. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else, let me know.
We will, thanks.
Faces of Shiloh. There's the Yankees. He was the middle, Grant, middle of the class. General Petraeus, Hornet's Nest, surrendered after 8-hour stand with 2,200 men. James and his men were paroled soon after exchanged. Soldiers. That was legit. Those are illegal to bring on the plane nowadays. Canteens. All this was apparently found on the battlefield. Or survived. That's the one. one. Oof. Killed on the battlefield. Ouch. Hornet's Nest. At one point in the battle, the Confederates were trying to break the Union defense line at the Hornet's Nest. The Confederates concentrated their greatest collection of artillery yet to appear on the American continent. The artillery played a major role in the battle, supporting infantry advances, breaking enemy attacks and causing many deaths and injuries, especially when you got up close because they could do canister. Canister fire was like a shotgun.
After number 1 rammed in a charge, number 3 would then insert a priming wire into the vent to pump the hole into the powder sack. This allowed the introduction of the spark to ignite the powder.
Yeah, it's artillery stuff. You know, I've seen a lot of these pictures on the, what was that? Oh God, who did the documentary on the Civil War? In the Navy. So I thought the drum would be bigger, or smaller. Oh, that's a surgeon's tools. Yikes. While I'm here, I'm talking about the visitor center. The visitor center is great. They have a movie there. The movie is really, really good. It actually goes through the entire battle. And it's almost an hour long, and it talks about both sides. It talks about how Grant wanted a decisive victory, how Johnson wanted a decisive victory. Johnson wanted a victory to destroy the Union's campaign in the West. Grant wanted a victory to basically demoralize and defeat the Confederate Army in the West as well. The big thing that came from this battle is that it was so bloody. It was so hard fought that it was a harbinger of what was to come. You still have a Gettysburg and a number of slugfests that are going to occur, where the casualties are going to be staggering. 22,000 men are casualties in this, dead, wounded, and missing. So that was the real huge point of this battle, is that it was kind of a real signal of some of the major battles that were about to come. Because up until this point, there really hadn't been a major, huge slugfest where thousands and thousands and thousands of people were wounded. I mean, they killed more people here in 2 days than I think any other battle. I mean, Gettysburg, it takes 3. And so this is a great location to come to if you got the time to go there. Shiloh, I like this place. You can get some nice souvenirs. Hello, darkness, my old friend. For the most part, this visitor center in the Battle of Shiloh, what I actually know about it is very little. Off the top of my head, all I can know is that this is Grant, where Grant became to prominence. It was opening. It destroyed, pretty much destroyed the Confederates' will to fight in the West, and allowed Grant to go down to Vicksburg. But other than actually what happened in the battle, I know day 1 the Union got pushed back. Grant got reinforcements, and then on day 2 he pushed all the Confederates back and won the day. And that's all I really know about it, and I know it was very, very bloody. It was the bloodiest battle up to that point. So that's what I know. Gonna learn more. Now, the Battle of Shiloh was actually kind of simple to explain how it went. Grant was marching south, and he was basically to cut the Confederacy in 2, east and west, and he stopped over this river, and he was waiting for Buell to reinforce before he marched on. Now, he was convinced that the Confederates would wait for him and not come after him. Johnson, who commanded the Confederate troops, thought that if he allowed Grant to consolidate his forces, he'd be overwhelming and he wouldn't be able to stop him. So he went on the offense, hoping to destroy Grant and then maybe destroy Buell or at least thwart their attempts to kind of move on down. So he forced this really hard march on the Confederates that lasted like 3 days through mud, and many of them hadn't even eaten when they got there. And all this would play out on the first day of the battle. Okay, right here is where the battle begins. Okay. As you can see, at that far tree line, about that far tree line, there's a couple things. What that basically marks, that marks exactly where the Union troops on patrol encountered the Confederates to start the battle. Grant was under strict orders not to press an engagement with the Southerners until Buell arrived with his reinforcements. So, but Peabody, against orders, basically sent out a detachment of 250 men to kind of like go out there and make sure they just weren't hitting patrols of Confederate troops. And they got out there into that field where the Confederates opened fire. Now Peabody, basically being confirmed that he was right, marshaled his troops forward to right along this ridge to meet the Confederates as they came out. Now, they didn't really hold this men long, but they started their fighting retreat from right in this area. This is right where the battle really began. Couple shots there, not much happened. They quickly fell back to here, where they made a defensive line, and we would fall back further. Now, Peabody only had like a couple hundred men, and he had around like 4,000 coming at him. So it really wasn't much of any kind of battle he could have like held out for any length of time. The real strength that Peabody did have, the real success that he did have, is that he warned everyone further up the line that the Confederate Army was here. Because both Grant and Sherman were convinced that Johnson, who was commanding the Confederates, didn't have the will or to the intuition to attack him. Right here where I parked and walked all the way back there to the engagement, right here was where the picket line was. This was the most advanced spot of the army, and basically what happened, the picket, his patrol bumps in, they drop back to that original line. They fall back really quickly to the picket line and just keep on going back. The next stop will be where Brieffield tries to make a stand before his camp. Ninth Arkansas Battalion. Now it can actually be a little confusing because the way the Civil War armies were set up and kind of how they fought are so kind of different. Maybe they're kind of similar to modern day in some general respects. It can be kind of confusing if you've never been in the army or whatnot. So some people don't understand your scout force is not the front of your picket line. Your skirmish, then you might have a picket line before your actual lines. And so these are all places where the battle actually collapsed on the first day as the Confederates had surprised them. I don't know if it can be seen, but right up here we're all along a ridge. Okay? Now after Peabody's scout crew bumped into him, this is where Peabody decided to arrange his troops, right along here, the vast majority. So as those people, as his troops, his pickets and his scout force fell back here, this is where he decided to make a stand. He was able to hold out here for 2 hours, from basically 7 to basically 9, right here. But the longer he fought, more Confederate troops kept showing up and kept pushing back kept putting his flanks at danger. So he had to retreat back to the main Confederate Union force, which, I mean, we're headed back towards the main battle and all the fields there. Now, the beauty is that after he's forced back through his camps to like the Hornet's Nest and all where the the savage battle will happen, the Confederates will actually stop and pause. This will give much needed time because they're looting the Union camps. Because several of the Confederates, many of the Confederates hadn't eaten for 3 days from marching from their stronghold. So that actually buys them time. Apparently Johnson was really dismayed when he found that officers were looting as well because they were hungry, and in many cases this was their first good meal in days and days and days. Here is where the camp was. The most notable thing is that monument right there is where Peabody would die, trying to rally his troops to repulse the Confederates. But mainly here was just the camp where the Confederates looted. Now, a cool thing here is that you kind of got an idea of what was going on. The Union was retreating, trying to fall back to establish some good defensive lines in which to hold out against the Confederate assault. The Confederates, of course, are trying to sweep up, force the Union into an indefensible position where they can force their slaughter or just whatever they can to destroy Grant's army. Because that's really what the Confederacy was into, trying to destroy armies, not just defeat them, to try and force a peace movement in the North that would force a peace deal and some kind of not a reconciliation, but a kind of a surrender of the Union to allow the Confederacy to break away. So right here is the most forward position of a Union camp from Sherman's division. And right down there is another Confederate mass grave where they threw the bodies after the battle. The Union did. Another marker for the 53rd Ohio Infantry. And right here is on the Riona Field. They were actually pushed back pretty quickly and took up a defensive line at the Shiloh Church, where the battle will get its name. And it's from there that Sherman will hold out for a few hours before he's forced back to Duncan's Field. He holds out for another few hours, for actually 7 hours. He holds out for a few hours from, say, like 5 a.m. to 9, and then falls back to Duncan at 9 and leaves Duncan around 5. Right here. Now, I'm pretty sure that the trees aren't in the same manner they were. They're probably, because this was a farming community, so there would have been wide open fields with different thicket forests every here and there. Doubt it was like this. Jeez, they're so inconsiderate after battles to mark down where everything was. So, what this is Riona's Field, where the Mississippi Monument is. So right there was the Union initial line. You can't see it, but back in those woods would be Shiloh Church. I'm guessing a lot of these trees would have been cut down, exposing it. In this field, the Union had lines like wide up there. And in this area, the Confederates took tons of casualties. Mainly for the fact that they were exposed from several angles to Union attack. And it was only the fact that they caught the Union by surprise that they weren't stopped here. Had the Union been organized and knew they were coming, probably could have repulsed them, because they had such strong defensive positions. Thought that was it. I thought that was it. Apparently, those are just monuments to regiments. Union regiments that were occupied here on the first day. This is where they were when they were surprised by the Confederates. So, up there is an Illinois battery. Supposedly what they say on the map is that there's something a little further. All right. See? You walk around here, you can actually walk around the whole entire battlefield. They even got an app. The app is pretty good. You can download it. Just go in the App Store and type in a Civil War battle, and you'll probably see the Civil War battle app. You can kind of do the battle from there, if need be, if traveling's not your thing. Okay, here's the Violent Sabbath. The reason they call it the Violent Sabbath is because the battle started on a Sunday. This church was actually there. The Shiloh Church. This was actually the headquarters of Tecumseh Sherman on the start of the battle. He was positioned here, and he basically early in the morning he hears Ray in the wheat field. Ray, off in that distance, he hears gunfire, which kind of lets him to know, and he starts getting messages that there are a lot of troops coming his way. He didn't believe they were there. He thought they were just scouting parties or small groups. Turns out about a third of the Confederate Army would be coming down at him quickly. Had he had time to set up a good defense, from what it says here, he probably would have been able to hold his position, but he was caught unaware and was forced to retreat. But the one thing it did is that his men were able to put up such a good fight here, and there was such volley and such casualties, it sowed a lot of disarray into the Confederate lines that would help them out later in the battle. There'd be a lot of confusion moving forward. And even so, after they were overrunning these camps, the Confederates actually stopped to loot them. Every person who will fulfill, destroys, mutilates. Okay, yeah, that don't destroy the camp. Don't destroy the camps. The Confederacy Army, known as the Army of Mississippi, with a total of officers and present men of tour duty of 44,000, marched from Corinth to deploy here. They thought they were going to stay in Corinth because Corinth had railway lines. It started at 5 a.m. when they bumped into Union pickets, and they slowly pushed them back. They would lose about 11,000 men total. Army of Ohio. They were the first. That was General oh no, Army of Ohio. That was under Buell. Buell was the reinforcements. They wouldn't arrive until at night on the first day and be the difference in the second day. The Army of Tennessee under Grant was here. They would lose about 11,000 as well, and the Army of Ohio would lose about 2,000. So right up here, William Tecumseh Sherman, who's known for his march to the sea, and also the Sherman Declaration. When asked if he would run for president, he said, "If nominated, I shall not run. If elected, I shall not serve." And it's still a working church. If anyone's curious, no, that cemetery is not for dead from the battle. So what we have here is a monument erected for the Confederate soldiers. Built in 1917 by the Daughters of the Confederacy. I've heard that name of that group a lot. To show on the right is how they were all hopeful of the victory they had won, and on the left is their sobering reminder that they had actually lost. Actually, it's not that bad of a monument, really. Around here is right where they did the surrender of what's called the Hornet's Nest happened. So, the Battle of Shiloh, the first day, as the Union was driven back, right in here with all these thick trees, the Union drew some lines. And right here was the center of the Union, and that was called the Hornet's Nest, which for 8 hours the Confederates tried to push them back. Now, they never did. So what ended up happening is they concentrated all their artillery on it, and they fired, but they pushed hard on the right and on the left and drove those back, eventually encircling it, capturing over 2,200 men. So when they capture the net, that's where this happened. Now, in here, supposedly, is the exact surrender point of the general who was in charge. Now, is this it? This is... This was the Illinois Infantry Army of the Tennessee. This regiment was surrounded here, and 223 of its officers and men were captured at... Okay. Okay, here's where Brigadier General Petrennis surrendered at 5:30 p.m. on April 6, 1862. As you can see, the woods, obviously they're a little younger than they would have been back in those days, they say. But this is where they were holding off. It's thick enough that they would hold at the line of the woods, and they had, like, were hide behind logs and whatnot, and were able to give a fierce fight. It only basically failed when instead of coming from that direction, they started firing in from that direction, even from behind or whatnot. They say a bunch of Union troops were actually able to escape out before they were completely encircled. But, yep, no dice. So 2,200 captured, and they were let off the battlefield and would not participate. And who knows? They said they were eventually exchanged. They were POWs, and eventually there was a prisoner exchange, and they went back. I don't know how many of them went back to war. The Hornet's Nest was probably a crucial thing because it bought the Union Army a lot of time, and it was this really stubborn holdout position that was commanded, and they literally saved Grant's army by holding out here. Eventually their left side and right side kind of caved in on them. They got surrendered and were forced to surrender, but they held out. And the Ken Burns documentary on the Civil War is very good about kind of describing the battlefield. And if you really want to know anything about the Civil War, you should really watch the Ken Burns documentary on it. Okay, so here I am on the left flank of the Union, the right of the Confederacy. See, Johnson made a mistake. He thought basically he thought like the center of the Union Army was their right flank, and he concentrated a lot there at their center. He didn't realize that they had a whole line up here in the right flank. So as he drove them back on the left and the center, the right actually was holding fine. In fact, it actually started to endanger his center as they moved them back. After they pushed them out of the Hornet's Nest, they actually moved past the the left flank of the Union, and the Union actually turned and started firing on them. So in the late afternoon, he had to move troops all the way over here to push the Union back. Oh, the Ohio. This is where there was an apple orchard. The fighting was done here. And they would push him back towards the landing. His initial plan, Johnson's original plan, was to go to the left, to push him hard on the left, to take back his crossing so that he couldn't escape down the Tennessee River, and to push him into a swamp and then force a surrender. But he didn't realize how much Grant was spread out, and then he got discovered early, and he wasn't able to take the landing, so that Union reinforcements were actually able to arrive. So here, Conquer or Perish talks about Johnson. See, both Grant and Johnson were looking for a devastating blow. Johnson was looking to defeat Grant decisively and destroy the Union's hopes of their western campaign. Grant had the opposite thing. He wanted to do a crushing blow and wanted to destroy the South in their west and cut the Confederacy in two. Because taking this area, he would take a strategic rail line to Corinth, and then he would have he would cut basically that would open up Vicksburg to attack. And then once they had Vicksburg, they would control the Mississippi River, severing the Confederacy in two and controlling off. They had already forced the Confederacy to give up Kentucky. But on like around 2:30, Johnson dies here. He gets shot. A mini ball hits him in the knee, and it severs the artery, and he bleeds out. So when they're looking for a wound, they're looking at his chest, his neck, his arm. Nope, nothing. It's behind his knee. Hit him in the knee. And he dies. He dies with the battle going very well, and him thinking like, I've got my victory. Little as he knows, is going to turn around and it's going to spell utter defeat, a major defeat for the Confederacy. Here's one of the interesting things in kind of the what-if scenarios of the Civil War. Johnson, who dies at this battle on day 1, had he been there on day 2, maybe he could have done something, maybe he couldn't done, he might not. The more interesting thing is he was an up-and-comer. He was considered a very good general in the Confederate Army. Now, if he survives, it's very well possible he could have been at Gettysburg instead of A.P. Hill. And that would play out completely different. And you know, if you're into those what-if scenarios on the Civil War, it's kind of interesting if you want to play out that theoretical exercise. But as for that, this is my part 1 of Shiloh.